What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Strength Coach Rants. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today we're going to be talking about creatine, what it is, how it works, and whether or not you should be taking it.
It's all my head, now stuck in the void again.
So it's that time of year again. We're nearing the end of a lot of seasons. Some seasons are already over, and then some are just starting right now. But it generally for the vast majority of my clientele here at the Lions Den, we're getting close to it being the off season. Basketball is about to end, hockey's about to end, football's elbow deep in spring conditioning, but baseball and lacrosse just started. I believe high school volleyball's been done for a while, but club volleyball is probably gearing up now because why not play year-round, right? But this time of year, I tend to get a lot of questions from both kids and parents as to whether or not their kids should be taking creatine. And I had written an article about this probably 2 years ago now, but it just dawned on me that I had never really talked about it, and nobody really reads much anymore. So I figured maybe doing a video would be the easiest way to get that out there. And this is going to be relatively short and sweet. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. Creatine's very science heavy because it is part of physiological processes in the body. But I'm going to give you the gist of what it does. We'll go over some of the old wives' tales about how creatine is bad for you and why you shouldn't take it. And we'll kind of debunk all that, and I'll let you know why all that is absolute nonsense as a fly. So what is creatine? Well, it's a lot of things. First off, it is a combination of 3 different amino acids. So it's glycine, arginine, and methionine, right? They all come together and they make creatine, which is a substrate for energy production within the body. Now, creatine itself isn't like energy. It just assists with the phosphocreatine energy system, and we're going to go over that in a couple minutes here. But the chemical component, the chemical breakdown, if you were to see it in an organic chemistry class, it would be C4H993O2. So that's a mouthful, and that's just 3 carbons, 9 hydrogens, 3 oxygens, 3 nitrogens and 2 oxygens. I'm going to put up on the screen here. I'm not going to even make an attempt to really read this name, but I'm going to put the name on the screen of how it breaks down, and that's it. So if you're not watching, it is about looks like a 25-letter word. That's creatine. So. But it's it's made of those 3 amino acids, and it is involved in what's called the ATP-PC energy. It's the word I'm looking for. System, right? So the ATP-PC system is the energy system that we use for anywhere from 5 to upwards of 15 seconds, right? Typically, people will say it's about 8 to 10 seconds. That's the going rate of what's considered to be the truth, I guess. But 8 to 10 seconds of all-out total energy, right? So we're talking about, vertical jumps, sprinting less than 100 yards, a 3 to 4 rep max on any given lift, anything that requires all-out effort for a very short period of time. Now, you've probably heard of ATP, all right? So ATP is adenosine triphosphate. The breakdown of ATP is what gives us energy within our body. Now, what that is it's adenosine, and then triphosphate means it's 3 phosphate molecules. Where the energy production happens is the breaking of the bond between the adenosine and one of the phosphate molecules. So after that happens, we get energy, we can do something, right? Now, whether that's sprinting or jumping or lifting, whatever the case is, that's how that begins the process of that. Well, there's a lot of stuff that happens before that, but that's essentially what our body uses to be able to do these things. Following that breakdown, you now have what's called ADP, right? So we lost one of the phosphates. So now we have adenosine diphosphate, and we have just a phosphate molecule. So none of that was destroyed. They just broke that bond, and that's what gave us that energy. Now, what creatine does is it kind of floats around, and creatine binds to this phosphate molecule and runs it back to the ADP to create ATP again. If I've lost you, just think we have something, a piece of that breaks off, creatine finds that piece and brings it back to the ATP to make ATP. Goodness gracious. I think I'm kind of messing myself up here. All right, so that's what creatine does. It is what's considered the rate limiting factor of energy production within this system. If we don't have creatine, we cannot kind of resynthesize that ATP. So having more creatine in theory and in practice, you would be able to allow that to happen more often. So what this does is this expands our ability to be able to produce energy at the highest of levels for a little bit longer, right? So that means maybe being able to get another rep, or maybe being able to, give all out effort for another 2 or 3 steps, right? And that doesn't seem like a lot, but in a game, it means a ton. And then in training, it really means a lot, because you're talking about the kind of the collective chipping away at this thing, right? So it doesn't matter if I can get one more rep today. That's awesome. Right. But if I get that one more rep every time I come in, we're talking about hundreds of extra reps every time I come in, or I can maybe add another 5 pounds, right? That all adds up. The cumulative effect of that is what is going to make us better as far as creatine is concerned. Now, I'm going to pull up a video it came across, I go on TikTok to find stuff to talk about on here. But this came across my feed, and I'll kind of break down what he says. But it's an interview for a podcast. I did some research on the podcast. They're like us. There's not a lot of people watch it. So I don't think this is all that damaging, but it's indicative of a lot of things. So I will play this, and then we will talk about it.
Creatine, steroids, all that stuff. Obviously, you're going to say no to steroids on camera. No, I'm joking.
On camera. Yeah.
But creatine, protein drinks, like, what do you tell your guys to help, with all of that?
I'll never say no to protein. Protein is good, 365. I don't hate creatine either, but creatine needs to be done off season, and you need to start winging off of it probably June, July. Creatine it sucks up a lot of water, and you start having some issues during camp and throughout the season. You have to be extremely hydrated, and there's a lot that goes into it.
So there's a lot that goes into it, aka I don't really know what I'm talking about. So now the problem with creatine is there's still a lot of people that kind of talk the way this coach does, right? Doing it with the best of intentions, but just has no idea what he's talking about. This is very reminiscent of the old, like, don't lift weights because it'll make you slow, or like weightlifting will stunt your growth, right? There's no real scientific fact to this, but what somebody did was they took a piece of information and they decided that that was gospel, and without really understanding it. So for instance, creatine does kind of have you pull in more water, but not in a bad way. And we're going to go over that in a few minutes. But he kind of took that and he decided that it pulls, that it dehydrates you. Okay. I'm trying to wrap my brain around this. Essentially, what creatine does is creatine helps pull more water into the cell. That's one of the reasons that we gain weight when we go on creatine. Your body's going to hold on to more water. Now, to think that that's a bad thing is absolute insanity, right? It's a super hydrator of the cell. It's not going to dehydrate you if it's pulling more water into the cell. And I don't know how this gets to be things that are touted by coaches and doctors sometimes, but it's absolute nonsense. If you are pulling more water into the cell, that is a very good thing, and it's not going to dehydrate you. It is literally quite the opposite, as it is a super hydrator. So don't listen to listen to your coaches, right? But when it comes to things like this, seek a second opinion, right? I'm not going to, as a strength and conditioning coach, I'm not going to tell you how to write an English paper, right? Football, baseball, basketball, hockey coaches shouldn't be telling their athletes from a supplementation perspective what they should and shouldn't be doing. All right, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over some of the benefits of creatine, some of what are touted as downfalls, and then we're going to debunk all that. Okay, so what are some of the benefits of creatine? Well, weight gain, right? That's something that we want. Weight gain is, for the vast majority of athletes, mass moves mass, so we will be able to get stronger, which in essence is going to make us faster. Some athletes just need to get bigger. You can protect yourself a little bit better with a bigger muscle. So weight gain. Size, obviously, right? So it's going to The size is actually within the muscle, right? So it's not what we would call like myofibrillar hypertrophy or like a functional hypertrophy, but it is like a sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, and it's gonna help with energy production. So the two different types of muscle growth, one is like the actual, and we'll talk about this because it kind of does this too, is a change in the actual size of the protein structures within the cell. That is gonna contribute to strength and speed and all that. And then there's another kind called sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, and there's a video, I'll link it in the description here, maybe at the end, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, and that is mostly like water and substrates and sarcoplasm, which is just cytoplasm within the sarcomere, which is a muscle cell. So weight gain, good thing, and it's for energy production, so it's going to allow us to perform at a higher level of like force production for a little bit longer. Total win, right? Along with the hydrating that we talked about before, right? It's a super hydrator. It's going to help you stay hydrated as long as we're drinking enough water. So all it'll do is you may feel slightly more dehydrated if you aren't as hydrated as you would normally be, right? So if my body normally holds, just to make this super easy, because this is way off, 100 liters of water, right? And now I'm taking creatine, so maybe I need like 103. If I'm at 98, I just feel more dehydrated, right? So we just have to maintain like more water consumption and electrolytes and all that to stay hydrated, but the benefits are huge. So putting more or having the ability to pull more water into the muscle cell does not dehydrate. You want to reiterate that again, because you'll hear that over and over again, mostly from, just sports coaches who don't really understand what they're saying. A lot of personal trainers and strength coaches are dummies too. So just don't listen to them. It's also going to help with that. So back to what I was saying before, with the hydration of the muscle cell, it's going to help your body stay in what's called an anabolic state more often for longer. So your metabolism, right? You know what your metabolism is. There are two parts to it. Essentially, we're either in one part or the other part. We're never not doing anything. Our body is either building or it's breaking down, right? So within your metabolism, you have what's called anabolism. Anabolism, it may sound a little bit familiar because the root word for anabolic, right, is anabolism. That's where anabolic comes from, the anabol. And that means to build. That's when our body is in the production of, I guess not really production, the creation of protein structures within the cell. All right. And the other half of it is called catabolism. Now, catabolism might sound familiar too if you're ever hanging around the gym bros, because the word catabolic comes from catabolism. And all catabolism means is essentially the breakdown of those structures. Right. So we're either building these structures or we're breaking down these structures. And to be hydrated is something that keeps us in that anabolic state. So Mauro Di Pasquale wrote a book, Amino Acids in the Athlete. I cannot for the life of me find where it was. I've read that book like 20 times. But he talks about even at like 3 to 5% of dehydration, not only does performance suffer, but anabolism essentially turns off. So if we are dehydrated by as little as potentially 3%, then we're looking at shutting down that anabolic process. So having creatine is actually going to help increase the likelihood that we're going to stay in an anabolic state. And I had mentioned before the the myofibrillar hypertrophy. That's where that comes into play, because we are anabolic. We're building more tissue, right? We're building more protein structures within the cell that are going to contribute to strength. So yes, creatine can also help make you faster from that perspective. So we're looking at more energy, more weight, more size, more strength. And as an added bonus, they're actually running studies right now with Alzheimer's patients and creatine, and they're finding that the cognitive benefits of creatine are pretty huge too. Which would make sense, because the energy pathways for energy production within the body don't really change. So the things that happen in the brain are very similar to what's going to happen in your muscle, different, but the mechanisms behind them are relatively similar. So like pulling from memories, creating memories, movement, like all that happens in the brain. So if we can use creatine to stave off Alzheimer's and things like that, that's pretty wild and pretty awesome. Creatine is also, we're still on the benefits. There's one more I wanted to tout. So it's also going to help us like gain muscle, like that sarcoplasmic goodness gracious, that myofibrillar hypertrophy, because it's going to allow us to get more reps with heavier loads. And what that does is that creates more damage. The more damage we create, the bigger we're going to come back and recover, right? So if I can lift, and let's say like I'm squatting 300 pounds and I get an extra rep or two every time I come in, it wouldn't work that way because you'd be progressively overloading or deloading or whatever the case is. But on average, if I can get one more rep with 300 pounds over the course of 50 weeks, 52 weeks, 50 is a little bit easier on the math. What is that? 300 times 50, that it's not 150,000. 15,000? It's an extra 15,000 pounds of workload, right? That has to benefit us, especially if we're able to recover, because we can recover better because we've got the creatine. So it's win-win-win. More weight, more strength, more energy, more hydration, better cognitive ability, more muscle, faster, stronger, the whole nine. Creatine does it all. And from what we understand, there are literally zero like negative side effects. You've heard it can give you gout. That's not true. It can exacerbate gout, right? It can give you kidney problems. There's no documentation that that's happened. However, if you do have kidney problems, it's been shown that it can exacerbate that as well. The dehydration thing is absolute garbage. Trying to think, what are some of the other ones I've heard? Well, so there was one case study. There was a kid. It was a young adult. 18 or 19, he might have even been 17, but he ended up with what's called compartment syndrome from creatine. And now we don't know anything else that he was on. All we know is that this kid was taking somewhere between like 30 and 40 grams of creatine a day and ended up with compartment syndrome in his quad. So what compartment syndrome is throughout the inside of your body, you have little like compartments. I'll kind of your calf, right? So from your knee down, there are 4 separate compartments that like muscles and nerves and arteries and veins sit in, and they're separated from each other. So if you were to like cut open your lower leg, everything wouldn't just spill out. You've got different compartments that hold different pieces of like the insides of your leg in there. And so we had the same thing in our quad, our biceps, everywhere has compartments, and they're just fascia that separate these various compartments. Now, in his quad, so I don't know if he just got like a ridiculously crazy pump, but he got compartment syndrome where the muscle pretty much like grew too much too fast with what we call a transient hypertrophy, or the quote unquote the pump. And it choked off blood supply and nerve supply to the rest of his leg. And that's actually not all that uncommon to happen like in the calf and the lower leg compartments. I've never actually heard of it happening in the quad. It's pretty wild. But he had to get what's called a fasciectomy, where they go in and they cut you open and they just leave it open for a while until everything calms down. Then you get sewn up. It drains some of the extra fluid, but that is not fun. It is said that he got this because he was taking creatine. Now, again, we know a couple things. For one, he was taking ridiculously high doses. We're talking 6, 7, 8 times as high as you're supposed to. And we also know that there is a good chance that this kid was on something more than just creatine. So he wasn't taking it right, and he was potentially taking it with other things. That kind of rules that one case study out. So you can't really tout that as like creatine's bad. We got this one time where this one thing happened where this one kid who's doing all this other stuff and doing it wrong got hurt. So then therefore it hurts everybody, although some people will take that and run with it. All right. So it's not nearly as bad as it's touted to be by overzealous doctors, and this is not to say don't listen to your doctor. It's just when it comes to things like supplementation and nutrition, your doctor's probably not an authority. They may have had like maybe 2 like 3-hour classes on nutrition back when they were in med school and 0 on supplementation. If they do have an understanding of the physiological processes, they can understand what creatine does. But that doesn't mean that they understand like the science behind it as far as like the data and the studies and all that go. So creatine's the most researched sports supplement on the planet, and it has been found. We have not had one study that showed negative side effects, but we have found studies that show all of the positives. So as far as creatine being dangerous, I would say that's not the case. As far as creatine being beneficial, I would say that absolutely is the case. But one little caveat here. So with creatine, we have what are called responders and non-responders. So it has been found within the data that creatine doesn't necessarily help everyone the same. So you're not necessarily going to get the benefits if you're what we call like a non-responder. And what's been theorized about these quote unquote non-responders is that their creatine stores are already super saturated and high naturally or via their diet, that adding extra creatine doesn't really do anything for them. You might be one of those people, but that would be a good thing. It just means you don't have to spend money on creatine and you're just ready to go. So the next thing we're going to talk about is like how to take it, how often, all that. So we've established what creatine does. We've established that it's generally safe for the vast majority of the population and that you may either be a responder or a non-responder. But now, like, how do I take it? How should I take creatine? And my best answer is to take just regular creatine monohydrate. So they make all these like designer creatines, and there's absolutely no evidence that there is any benefit to anyone when it comes to those outside of the supplement companies who can now charge you more because they put something else in it, right? Creatine's relatively inexpensive, and you can find it just about anywhere. But if they can create a niche by putting something else in there or making it a creatine chelate or whatever the case is, they can fool you into thinking that it's a better product when in reality it's just not. Kind of like when, you know, there's a pharmaceutical company and they have a patent about to run out. So what do? They take that same drug and they throw on like a painkiller, or they throw on like an anti-inflammatory, and they attach it to it. So now, boom, new drug. No need for like the patent's going to run out, but they get to market this new drug as a better version of the last one. So when you go to the doctor and the doctor writes you a prescription, he's going to probably write you one for the new one instead of the old one. And when in reality, you know, where the old one you'd be able to find a generic somewhere for a lot cheaper, but now you can't because they've decided that they were going to change the drug ever so slightly, not to necessarily be beneficial for you, but so that they can maintain the amount of money that they're bringing in every year and possibly charge a little bit more for it. That's what supplement companies do when they go to sell you creatine that is anything other than just regular creatine monohydrate. If you're going to take it, take the powders, don't take the pills. 5 grams in pills is a lot. You're going to get tired of it. You'll run out faster. They're more expensive. Not by a lot, but enough where they're inconvenient. As much as you would think that these pills would be convenient, they are ridiculously inconvenient. When you can just take a scoop of like creatine, it's like that much. It's going to be like a pretty small scoop. We're talking 5 grams. There's not a lot of fillers that go into creatine. So do the powder, and you really only need about so the studies show anywhere from 3 to 6 grams. On average, 5 grams is about perfect. That's not going to be too much. That's not going to be too little. It's not going to put you in a position where you're taking too much and you end up like that kid with compartment syndrome. But it's also going to make sure that you're getting enough to really see some benefits. Now, a lot of companies and some of the journals suggest loading, right? So if you ever heard of creatine loading, what does that mean? Well, that's where we take upwards of 20 grams over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. So you're looking at 15 to 20 days, you are super loading, right? You're taking 4 times the amount. And what that is meant to do, supposedly, is kind of fill your creatine stores a little bit faster so that you can see the benefits to creatine usage a little bit quicker. Now, the jury's still kind of out on that. I'm of the mindset that was something designed by supplement companies. And I spent some time in and around labs where a lot of this data gets curated, stuff gets thrown out if it's not beneficial to the company who's actually paying for the data to be curated. So I'm of the mindset that a supplement company early on decided this stuff's really cheap. It's really not worth the effort to put in a bottle and then sell it. So we've got to do one of a few things. We've got to add something to it that's inexpensive, but make people think that it's really good so we can sell it for more. Or we can have them load it, right? So if you look at most creatine that you buy, there's going to be somewhere between 30 and 50 servings, right? Give or take. You get a smaller bottle, there's less. You get a bigger bottle, there's more. If you're taking 4 times the amount that you would typically take at 5 grams a day, you're going to go through that container by the time you're done loading. So you get through that 2 to 3 week period and boom, I got to buy a new bottle. Whereas before, maybe it's like once a month, once every month and a half, you're trying to buy, or you're having to buy a new bottle. This loading phase makes it so that when they get you for 2 containers worth of product right off the bat. So take that for what it's worth. There is some data to show that loading does work, but that it's not completely necessary. You may buy yourself an extra, 10 days of benefits from creatine. So, weigh the pros and cons. Not that expensive. You can load. I just think if you're, especially, we saw this with, I don't know how old many of you are, but Muscle Tech used to be like a really big company, and they had Cell Tech, right? And Cell Tech was their creatine. It was 10 grams of creatine with 75 grams of dextrose. Now, dextrose is like a sugar that's very high on the glycemic index. It gives a really big insulin response, and 75 grams of it is a lot. So anyways, you'd buy a tub of that, and they were like $60 or $70. They were not inexpensive. And then by the time you got done loading, you had to go on to a second bottle, right? So you're talking about shelling out $150 for a supplement that may or may not work for you within the first like 3 weeks of having it. So it was great for their bottom line. And then they were able to also, this is kind of a side note here, they're able to tout that people on on Cell Tech, we're gaining 10 to 15 pounds in the first month, right? Well, if you're loading, you're taking 150 milligrams of dextrose every single day for 2 weeks. That's 600 calories of like one of the most high glycemic index carbohydrates on the planet. So of course you're going to gain some weight, you're going to retain some water, all of that. So that was just a little bit of an aside. Loading, you can do it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But again, I'm a very skeptical mind. I'm of the mindset that it was probably marketing strategy for various supplement companies. But again, could be beneficial. Who knows? You're going to want to take it as far as like time goes. There's no real benefit to taking it before or after you work out. What I advise my clients to do is take it at the same time every day. So have it be part of like your morning routine or have it be part of your evening routine, because if you put it around times that you train, you might not train some days and then you're going to forget to take it. And creatine is one of those things that we have to kind of keep taking. It's not, we can't like take a week off and expect everything to kind of be functioning the way it's supposed to. You got to stay on top of it. So make sure that you take it at a time of day where it's consistent, either early or not early in the morning. You might not wake up early, either in the morning or in the evening, along with, let's say, I take my creatine, then I brush my teeth. I'm going to have to do that every day. Now I'm going to do it. It's not going to keep you up. There's no like stimulant properties to it. You'll be more than okay to take it in the evening, but some people like to take it in the morning, and that is more than okay as well. Now you're going to want like an insulin spike of some kind when it comes to taking creatine, because there has to be something to pull it into the cell. Now it doesn't mean if you drink creatine, you're just going to pee it all out if you're not having an insulin like spike of some kind, but you would be much better off taking it with a protein shake or with something with a little bit of sugar in it, so your body sends out that insulin to drive it into the cells. Let's see. I feel like I kind of got everything there. Nothing really more on my sheet. Looks like that might be it for the day. So creatine, remember it's, let me pull that back up. Where are we? Here, let me try to read it. 2-carbamidoyl methylamino J-acidic acid. Okay, that's not a J, that's a bracket. All right, so that's creatine. Remember, it's made up of a couple different amino acids. Or 3 different methionine, glycine, arginine. It is the rate-limiting factor in energy production. It will help you get stronger, get faster, put weight on, and not bad weight. It's not going to make you fat. It won't make you quote-unquote bloated. That's another kind of old wives' tale. Nothing really but positive benefits. The only kind of downside is you do just have to make sure that you stay hydrated, because if my body is capable of holding more water, if I'm down, right, like I said earlier, say we're 100 liters of water and now I'm capable of 103, if I'm down to 99, 98, then I'm going to feel a little bit worse, right? So you have to just make sure that we're maintaining our hydration, not just water, but electrolytes, to hold some of that water in. Don't drink Prime. There's not nearly enough sodium in it, which is one of the reasons it tastes so good. Stick with something like a Propel or something without a whole lot of calories, because most of us don't need those extra calories throughout the day. But it would be nice to have those electrolytes. So that's it for today. Hope you learned something. I hope you know something about creatine now. Maybe you don't understand the science behind it, but you understand that it's going to be beneficial to you, and it's really more than likely not going to hurt you. And if a coach tells you that you shouldn't take it during the season, tell him he's absolutely wrong, because it is so unbelievably beneficial to take during the season. Oh, one more thing. Creatine, like cycling. People talk about that, right? Like you would cycle on and off of steroids. You should cycle on and off of creatine. I don't think that there's any proven value to doing that. I mean, should you be on something forever? Probably not, right? So if you want to take some time, you're going to take some time away from training, you can take some time away from creatine. You're taking some time away from the sport, you can take some time away from creatine. But I don't think it needs to be like this 3 months on, 2 months off thing so that your body can get back in check. Your body's not going to stop producing creatine because you're adding some. It doesn't work that way, like the same way it would with the negative feedback of steroid use. It's very different. All right. So that is it now. I hope you learned something. Creatine's good. It's not bad for you. You should take it 5 grams at a time. There's no need to take any more. It's not going to do more for you. It's a rate limiting factor of energy production. It'll make you stronger, bigger, faster, all the good stuff that you need for sports. That's it. We'll see you next time.